morning, cellists. Here we are in the final lesson on the Prelude. It's quite a big one. We've got a lot of technical things to get through. But don't worry, there's plenty of opportunity for you to stop the video and go back whenever you need to. Right, so today's technical digest is going to be a couple of bow exercises and another chromatic. At the last class I offered you up to play the G chromatic, up and down 2 octaves, and today we're going to look at a single octave chromatic up the D string, like this, which will lead you to the exact location that you'll be in for part of the string crossing in the Prelude, where we get this point in Bach 34. So it'd be a really good idea to practice going up to that point, and we're going to use the chromatic scale to do that. Notice that the arm is quite raised, my arm over here, so that it's not don't be too dropped back like this. Don't allow the wrist to form an angle like that. Just keep it high, and that will support your fingers feeling strong and also at ease to move up and down this register and come back, of course. Nice and simple, but a good preparation. Now, the bow exercises. One is really simple. It's going to be the converse of one we've already done. So we've previously done this, and I think we've also done it on middle strings. That's one we've done before. Now we're going to start with the upper string. So we're going to go A, D. That's all it is. Really, really simple. Now what we can do is in fact apply that bowing to the chromatics that you've been learning. So the chromatic I've given you today, up the D string, we could combine that with the previous bow exercise, which went D-A, like this. And notice that here, again, a fairly high upper arm on the right hand side, so that you're really being ready for the oscillating high string, and it's just a very small movement in the arm and wrist there. Really worth a try for that one. And then let's try the alternative, which is going to be using the new bow pattern, A-D, like that, and this time we're going to go up a portion of your G chromatic. You can find the notes exactly that we're going to try out in the Bach. Towards the end of bar 37 there's an open A, that'll be a down bow stroke, slurred to the D, and go up the chromatic like this. And all the time we'll be looking at having flat bow hair as you tip from one string to the other. And so it sounds a little bit odd because we're missing a part of the chromatic, but just bear with it, you just know where the fingers work up to the G there. So I'll show you one more time. And at the moment we're using a fairly equal amount of bow from the upper string that's moving melodically and the lower string. When we want to add in a crescendo, we're going to change the bow length. We were going to use more. I'll show you what I mean. Now, the astute of you will notice that although I'm using more bow, I do not give it to the 2 notes equally. I give much more, the lion's share, to the upper note, which is the rising one. So if we start off pretty equal, now pull more, push more, pull more. At this point we've practically used the whole bow on one note, and that's how you're going to create a very dramatic crescendo when we come to this in the Bach Prelude. Now returning to our technical digest, because I've given you a little bit of an overboard hint on what's happening later. I also would like you to have a look at a simple open string bow pattern. So I'm just moving across 3 strings. That's a 4-note pattern, G, D, A, D, and then oscillate between the top 2 strings, and again, now be aware of the arm. So again, a fairly high arm, upper arm, for the oscillation part. We're going to try and drop the elbow as we come back to the G string, raise, keep it there, and lower. So you can see we lower just at the end of the set of oscillations so that you're ready for the G string. This will become useful later in the prelude. One more preparatory exercise for you today, and that is returning to the 3-note chord, starting just open string chord like this, middle 2 strings and top 2. We'll have a fairly generous start, but only in sound, not in expenditure of the bow, so that you can have as long as we can on the top 2 strings. Really important that you breathe during that so that you don't crunch the sound, and we're also keeping nice flat bow hair all the way to the point. That's relatively easy to do that on open strings, and it should sound perfectly fine and maybe not notice whether or not the technique is applied accurately. But let's now try it with the stopped chord, and what we're going to use is the final chord of the prelude. So we have the 4th finger on the G on the A string, 3rd finger on the B on the D string, and an open G. Now immediately we are encountering a problem here. On the 3 notes that we'll be using, the G string of course is full length, but the other 2 strings are almost only half a length, so it requires quite a lot of care. You will not be able to start so near to the bridge in order to get that G comfortably resonating without too much of a crunch. So we're going to go for more or less mid-string, and then we would start pushing towards the bridge for the upper 2 so that you can make it last all the way to the point with a flat bow hair, remembering to breathe. And again. Now in that exercise I'm going at a fairly moderate dynamic, and obviously when we come to the application in the prelude, at this point it really has risen to a big dynamic, and you will be probably expending more energy on that, so it'll be harder to make it last. But at the moment for the preparation, just don't worry about that, just go for a nice moderate dynamic, MP, MF, concentrating on being relaxed with the breath as you begin. And that you are trying to get across fairly early in the bow stroke, but it's a fairly slow bow stroke. So there's something for you to just warm up with and practice by itself, out of context, and it'll become much easier when we put it into context and add another layer to it. Okay, that's all the technicals for the moment. Let's now return to final phrase of the Feuillard study, number 38. And this one has been all about string crossing, preparing really for the portion of the prelude we're about to also enter into. We've got to bar 15, and using the bow technique that is given in here, which is these pinched notes at the point, starting up bow, we have this. To 4th position, leave the 1st finger there and stretch, shift to the C sharp with a 1, 3, you see now the application of that D chromatic, because this study uses that descending D chromatic oscillating with the A string. So really absolutely in tandem with the exercise I've given you at the beginning of the class here. There is a slight difference in that their solution, they come back to a 4th finger on the C natural and then move into the standard chromatic fingering. It's not a problem, we're very versatile, so please just, go with the book on that fingering, but you'll have already tried with the, the chromatic fingering standard, and then of course we're coming from a higher note, so it's starting in a slightly different place, and hence a fractionally different solution. So that's all fairly straightforward. And having arrived at the bottom, we've got a tiny bit to finish with. Which was just moving back into fourth position with an extension, trying to keep that first finger where it is, so that it's ready to hop across for the final D. Now, as before, it's really useful to do this study both the way that it's been presented and in variation 1, which is slurring in pairs. And that, of course, matches in line with the prelude bowings. So that the fragment we were looking at and that by putting in the slurs you can hear much more clearly the melodic line driving through there in between the oscillating A's. So this whole study can, I think, usefully be done with the Bach bowing, i.e. the slurs in pairs. But why not give yourself a little extra challenge? Create some dynamic shape. There are none given in these studies, but don't let that put you off. You can probably just go with your natural instinct that when it rises, quite typically you can move the dynamic up as you rise and away as you fall. So if we tried the whole study, just seeing what happens with our freedom of dynamics, let's just give it a go. So you can see there'd be quite a lot of fun to be had in that, moving through the dynamics and the drama, and you can really hear that in the lower part with those lovely chords. Anyway, I hope you do enjoy it. Let's now begin the final quarter of the prelude. So we arrived at bar 31 in the last class, and this is just at the point at which we're about to do the string crossing, which we've been practicing in that study. Now, like my recommendation in the study, you really need to take out the melodic line by itself and practice that first. Now, there are two reasons. One is so that you are very aware of the melodic line, and the second is to make sure that you're training your left hand to remain depressed against the fingerboard for the whole time that you oscillate, which is exactly the same as we've been attempting to do in the Feuillard. So in order to be really clear of this, especially as the way that the typical Bärenreiter edition is presented, is quite awkward, because a different solution is given to this oscillating A, where sometimes you just have it written as if it's a melodic line, and sometimes you have got the oscillation notes are beamed above with the melodic notes underneath, which also is confusing to the eye. So the long and the short, I have printed out the actual notes, the melodic notes, and this is what you need to try first. Let me show you. There it is on screen. Perfect moment to take a bit of a screenshot on that. Now, the tiny pencil marks that are in there in the first bar are just indicating where we would later add in the oscillating A's. But just go by the printed notes initially. The other mark that you might see on there is the end of the second line. I've put a line slashing through before the last quaver. That's because there's a change in the melodic shape at that point, and you need to be aware of it. Other than that, at the end of the first line, you can also see a couple of little dynamic points, and that's because there is an echo sitting in there. So that this exercise itself, as it stands. It's very straightforward, and it's just literally backwards and forwards with the bow per quaver, which is exactly what the actual section is. Playing it a little on the quick side really for the melodic feel, but you get the idea, and that you can hear in that a little echo. Now the way to practice this echo without the oscillation, and even with the oscillation, is about bow length. So we have here fairly generous amount of bow, maybe about a third, something like that, quarter of a third, and then the echo, just use less. And this will also work when we oscillate. Then you go back to the standard length of bow. Then we're rising, so you rise dynamically. That last D isn't part of the melody, it's just a side to it. Stay where you are in fourth. There's the aside note again. And at this point you want to put your first finger on the B. Now at this point we have got to the D on the third finger, which is exactly where you will have arrived in your D chromatic scale that I've given you, so that you know where that is. And we're looking at a fairly good raised arm shape. Now once you've arrived at this D, this is the moment at which the melodic shape changes. The following quaver, the B, belongs to the following bar. So we have like an upbeat. And then again. And again. And again. And again. Cut a bit short this time because he's going to go on a different adventure at this point. It's really worth taking that out and absolutely understanding it in your ear, so that altogether we've got three different elements: the echo, the rise, and then the falling sequence, which is always including an upbeat. So again, let's have it as we've got. And if you really get that melodic line under your fingertips, in your ear, in your mind, with all the shaping, it'll be really, really easy just to tip the bow at the end of every single stroke, like this. There it is. And you can see we can still get that that dynamic rise as we go up in pitch onto the D string there. And one of the other tricks with that, as per what I showed you with the chromatic rise in the beginning section of this class, that you're basically never equally, or you're not equally sharing the bow as you go up the crescendo. You're going to give the lion's share to the moving notes. You know, I'm maybe overdoing it there, but it gives you the general idea that as you rise up, use more of the bow in the slur on the first note and less on the oscillating A. And that's going to be your trick for really creating fantastic drama. We've now got to bar 37, and this is something we've already been preparing for. You know, you've done your chromatic work and we've looked at the bow pattern. All we've got to add in here is a few extra notes before we go on to the bow pattern that we looked at the beginning of the class. So at bar 37, start on the second quaver of the bar at this point, because the previous pair belong to the end of the last sentence, if you like. So starting on an up bow on the second quaver's worth in the bar. Now in this case, because the oscillating D is the same note as the string that your melodic line is on, we are, of course, taking the finger on and off the string. But that's the only time at which you're going to take the fingers on and off the string, not when you oscillate from a different string. And that's really what I've been trying to push home, if you like, through the study that we've looked at. And of course through the section we've just been doing, moving up the D string, oscillating to A. All the time the fingers remain on the fingerboard. They do not, except for the open D, they do not come off. So here we have it. In terms of the solutions, you can either play the F natural F sharp 2, 3 and then go 2, 3 for the G, G sharp, or you can move straight into standard chromatic fingering, put a 1 on the F sharp. So the latter part of that chromatic rise we have discussed, and you know how to do it. And there is something actually really beneficial about looking at some elements in advance, so that when you come to them it doesn't feel so overwhelming that, oh, another new thing. It's not new because we have already prepared by doing the chromatic, and of course if you've done the warm-up session from the beginning of the class, this will already feel like, aha, something you recognise and you feel you've got control of, albeit it might be in its beginning stages of control, but you will have control from that open A onwards. So we've arrived at the top, and as I mentioned before, I'll just remind you of course that that crescendo rise is using increasing amounts of bow on the rising note. Now arriving at 39, these last two lines can actually be happily extracted into to separate the exercise. And we're initially going to look at the chord shapes themselves pizzicato. So here's the moment, pop your bow down. We're going to look at the chords themselves. We've got 4, 3 and 1 for the first chord. So each bar, the first 3 notes will tell you the chord for the entire bar, and you will just stay there. There's no open Ds in this solution. So we have 1, 3, 4, and then we move second and third fingers across to the A string, and I've got a nice barred first finger for the next chord in bar 40. So that's literally across the 2 middle strings there. Then, although it looks as if there's a huge amount going on, going from bars 40 to 41, physically, no, it's very small movement. Everything's pretty much set up. You just move your little finger from the A string to the D string. That's all there is. You may find you need to raise your arm a little to help you get over that and not allow the little finger to touch the A string. There it is. And then the final chord, we let go of the 1 and we swap 3 and 4. So we're looking at minimal finger movement there. Here it is, I'll show you. You can take a screenshot of this, and there is those 4 chords, pizzicato, and we're trying to minimise the finger movement. And you also will be pressing quite hard on the string there to make sure that in the case of the pits you can hear it. And when we add the bow, you really need that left hand to be very strong and very good firm contact in order to have clarity with the bow moving at quite a fast speed. Then the bow pattern we looked at the beginning of class, of course, is the bow pattern for these chords. So that once you're comfortable with the chords, you can just add the bow pattern. So we've got a nice strong hand, we have this. Right, I'm going to cover the very last bar and how to get into it in a moment. But just to recap, we've got the chords. You know what they are. They're nice and solid. Left hand doesn't have to do very much movement at all. You just add the bow pattern and keep freedom of that. And you can see that actually we're using the whole bow. A flat bow hair will help you with oscillating evenly between the strings. And we're using the whole bow because we've got to this amazing peak, frankly. By the time we've gone all the way up that chromatic, it really is a glorious view, if you like, at the top here. Now the final piece of the jigsaw is how to get out of bar 41 into 42, which is the last chord. And this often can cause some problems, and we need to break it down. And I'll show you the exercises you'll need there to break it down. So another moment here for a screenshot. There we have it, 3 components. And I will just go through those now. So initially, we've just got the last 2 semiquavers of bar 41, and there will be on an up bow, so practice it on an up bow, so as much as possible everything is exactly as it will feel. So initially we're just moving onto the B in the final chord, because that is where this resolution sits. The C wants to fall to the B, and your ear and your fingers need to know that and feel it and focus on that B. Then once you're happy with that, it's fairly straightforward, you then add in the G. And again. So we're looking at a fairly flat bow hair there. And then we finally add in the top G, so we have this. Of course, that's all about our 3-note chord, which pivots on the D, which is again part of our preparations from the beginning of the class. In terms of the last chord lasting long enough, you can just practice the top 2 notes initially, and remembering your breath, the flat bow hair all the way to the point, and getting nearer to the bridge. Sorry. And as I mentioned at the beginning of class, the issue with this chord is, of course, you've got a full length string and then 2 that are almost half length, which requires a little bit of care, but I have discussed that. Anything else we need to know there? Oh, well, just really to point out that in this breakdown of tiny little components, it means you just have a fraction of a second to rearrange your fingers. So you're going from F sharp, C. Whilst you're on the C, your 3rd finger can be ready behind it for the resolution. And of course you've got a moment before your little finger's needed on the A string to get it across there whilst you're playing the lower part of that chord. Let's just have another look at that. So you can see my little finger was just momentarily later than the 3rd, but that doesn't matter because I've not played it yet. So that way we can have a really lovely smooth transition out of 41 into 42. Easy. Let's have a little look at the whole of this section that we've got so far and building in all those dynamics, let's hope. Okay. And you'll need an awful lot of control to get that last note as long as you really want it. As a pause note, it should be a bar and a half, and that would be 6 whole beats, which is quite a challenge to do. Don't worry though, if in your excitement the bow is a little bit faster than you intended and it's not quite there, give the illusion of it being long enough. I'll show you what I mean. And you can just hold the poise, keep the vibrato going, and it might give the illusion that it was a bit longer than it really was, and it was what you were intending. I really hope that you enjoy this. I think it's the most glorious part of the whole prelude. It's so exciting to arrive at the best view ever. And I'll be uploading a performance of this movement tomorrow. Take care.